People often denigrate faith as belief in the unbelievable. It's just a denial of evidence. You see that in the atheist crowds constantly. But to me, faith is something like the willingness to take a risk based on a presumption.
For a Christian faith, like, you're never going to have all of your questions answered. Because if you had all your questions answered, you wouldn't need faith.
My faith is not irrational. It's complementary to my rational mind. My rational mind gets me like really, really close, and my faith takes the last step.
We've got the true nature of faith.
Christ says the same thing in Revelation when he comes back as a judge. He says that his harshest judgment isn't reserved for those who are hot or those who are cold, so the good or the evil for that matter, but for those who play both ends against the middle and sit and never commit. And that's really an interesting idea, right? Is that in some real sense, God, at least how God's represented in the Old Testament, is definitely the spirit on the side of the adventurous, for better or for worse. And that's quite something, right? Because it also, I think, bears some sheds some light on this notion of the terrifying element of the transcendent. It's not, whatever God's goodness is, it's not some simple, harmless, like all-encompassing, weak compassion. It's something terrifying in its moral breadth, because it would really be something if the Spirit of God is on the side of the rampantly adventurous. And I think you can make a strong case for that, at least from within the confines of the biblical corpus. I mean, Abraham's an adventurer, Moses is an adventurer, Noah's an adventurer. These are people David's an adventurer. They aren't people who stayed home and tried to never cause any trouble, right? Which is a kind of emasculation in and of itself.
Well, faith is a venture. It's entrepreneurial. I think people of faith, I call it the entrepreneurs of life.
And so why make the entrepreneurial connection?
Well, there's a vision, there's a venture, there's a risk, there's a cost. Mm-hmm. The whole thing is wrapped up with that.
Well, I think that's lovely to tie that in with faith, too, because in our culture, people often denigrate faith as belief in the unbelievable, as if it's first of all purely propositional, and second of all, it's just a denial of evidence. You see that in the atheist crowds constantly. But to me, faith is something like the willingness to take a risk based on a presumption. And maybe the presumption is, well, truth will set you free. It's like, well, tell the truth and see what happens. It's going to get you in a lot of trouble. The evidence that aggregates around you if you tell the truth to the degree that you can isn't that this is going to be the easy path forward. You have to decide. This is something Kierkegaard stressed, right? Is that you have to decide certain things as preconditions for action, independent in some real sense of the evidence. And that's the faith. And this is when Abraham, for example, in his great adventure, he follows God's call out of the safety of the tent. The faith is to heed the call of adventure, even though he's got everything in some sense that you'd need if you're only interested in hedonistic gratification. But there's something beyond that, and it's faith that allows you to make those decisions to step into the unknown future.
The reason I wanted to tee this one up is because I've had conversations with people who I really love are friends of mine, but who are skeptics and unbelievers. And I've heard them say, this is pretty close to an exact sentence, something along the lines of, well, I wish I was like you. I could just believe and that'd be it. It must be easy to be you. You just believe. And that's the most wrong thing you could possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it's a bit of a dismissive, condescending thing to say as well, mm-hmm. because that's not how it works. And that's what, Jordan Peterson is getting at here. Yeah. Faith is not, I'm just going to just like choose to, just make something up and just believe it. And yeah. I know how I can speak to how my faith works. Mm-hmm. The way my faith works is I have done the best I could to analyze the worldviews that I know about. So whether that's Christianity, materialism, other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I have a degree in Middle Eastern religion, so I've looked at other people's way of thinking, and certainly taken a long look at Western materialism. And what I see are worldviews that have some explanatory power, but then have holes. Well, materialism can kind of explain this, but it can't explain this, 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 and this. some sort of like dualism or something, or Hinduism can explain, you get the point. And to my mind, Christianity is the worldview that has the most explanatory power and has the smallest and fewest holes. Okay, I have to be honest and say it can't explain everything. Like this 1 + 1 = 2, 100%. We've got objective of nature. I have to agree with that and say that's true. But it gets close enough. It gets to my mind, far closer than the other worldview. And so then I put faith in it. I'm like, well, if it has all of this explanatory power, I kind of trust the guy on the cross to close the 2 or 3 remaining holes.
No,
at some point, So that's
a
where the faith
skeptic might say, "Oh, that sounds like God of the gaps argument."
Yeah, but it's not though, because I'm not trying to explain how rain is made, or I'm not trying to explain the holes that I perceive are not holes of scientific explanation.
Right.
They're more
philosophical
things. Yeah. I mean, for me, if I'm being honest, if I'm going to, the opposite of straw manning is steel manning. If I'm going to steel man the anti-Christian argument, I'm going to make their best argument against. I do think is probably the problem with pain argument, and I do think that the Bible gives us an incomplete explanation of where pain and evil come from. I think if I'm just being honest. But for me, while I think there's an incomplete answer that is still satisfactory, is because God himself entered space and time to suffer for and with us.
Right.
And I don't think Jesus would have gone to the cross lightly. And so I'm able to, for me, I can trust him with the parts I can't quite put together, if that makes any sense. Because like I trust the guy on the cross, so, and that's would take a long explanation to get to what that means, and maybe it's another episode. But suffice it to say, for me, the worldview, the paradigm with the least and smallest holes is Christianity. And I would argue that maybe, secular materialism is more a God of the gaps theory than mine. But, that's maybe for another.
There's no materialism of the gaps.
Yeah.
How could people say?
I don't know. But
Seems like it
they're
to me
just
too.
giant holes they can't explain. And it almost, to me.
Yeah,
and
that's what you hear. Is that you can't explain it yet.
But they can never explain why my relationship with my wife is important. They can never explain how it felt when I dropped my daughter off at college, and why it was painful yet good. You know what I'm saying? There's so many things in life that transcend chemistry and physics. I don't even know how to make that argument make any sense at all.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I believe the stuff we talked about Nazis. I believe there are things that are just truly evil and things that are truly good. And if there's true good and true evil, then there's got to be an author behind that and the forces behind it. It's kind of where I land. And so for me, my faith is not irrational. It's complementary to my rational mind. My rational mind gets me like really, really close, and my faith takes the last step. Okay? Now, then that gets to like their point about adventuring, which to me, real faith is that which makes you step out. Real faith is that which you act upon. Okay? So, I am not a small man. And I came in here today and I sat upon this lovely chair. That's faith. I believe this chair will hold me. And so I put, I mean, with reckless abandon, at that point when you plop back onto a chair, you're dropping your whole weight on it. And, there's been a couple times in my life when I sat in chairs that were not sufficiently well made I've broken a couple of chairs, and that's pretty embarrassing. But, that's faith misspent. I put my weight, I lean on something, I put myself on it, and then it breaks. It doesn't hold me up. That's faith misplaced. And so like, I think what they're talking about is like, you really believe. And, anyone who's a Christian, I think at some point has maybe felt like God, we use these religious words like God spoke to me. Well, what we mean is that like something in us we just feel like it's not coming from us and we're being called out to do something, the call of Abraham to leave his comfortable home or, whatever. And, you answer that and you go do what you think you're supposed to do in the service of the transcendent good, to use their terminology, with no assurance it's going to work out. And that is an act of faith. And it's in you're trusting that there is a God out there and that he's going to take care of you when you take risks for him,
Yeah. And I'll just piggyback on that. I've kind of talked about this in another video, but my take on faith is, and the fact that I think for a Christian faith, like you're never going to have all of your questions answered, because if you had all your questions answered, you wouldn't need faith.
Right.
You would just have the information, and then you'd be like, it would just be, do you want to accept this at face value or not? It's all answered. Here it is. Here's exactly how the universe, it's irrefutable evidence that God created the universe, irrefutable evidence that Jesus was a real person and died and rose again and all these things. And everything in the Old Testament can be 100% proved, and everything in the New Testament can be 100% proved. And you're never going to have that, because if you had that, you wouldn't need faith. And I think what you see time and time again in the Old Testament through the New is God is after faith. It's like Noah's faith and Abraham's faith, and
trust me,
it was credited to him as righteousness, and it continues on. God wants us to trust him, in those gaps. And so it's not a God of the gaps argument. It's not a gap. I think the gaps are necessary, because without gaps, you don't need faith.
Well, don't we as parents ask the same thing of our children? Don't we ask them to do things that they don't understand? Trust me, this is for your good. Mm-hmm. When we take them to the doctor to get a shot or something, and they're like, no, don't do it, please, not that, and you're like, it's for your, you want them to trust you. Mm-hmm. Mommy wouldn't hold you down and let him stick a needle in you if it wasn't for your good. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. We want them, and I guess the same thing with us, that there are things that we don't understand, and God just is like, just trust me with this. Mm-hmm. And that's a part of your relationship with God, is coming to a place where you're like, okay, I don't get it all, but I trust you. I mean, this is a very trivial example, but for me, I hope my wife doesn't get mad about this, but I will go ahead and share it. Probably the single greatest ongoing conflict, and this is a sign of a good marriage, I think, the single greatest ongoing conflict we have is in regard to my driving.
That might be the single greatest conflict that you and I have.
Yeah,
I would be with her on that.
So there's just a constant drumbeat of like, there's a car, slow down, that kind of stuff. And we've been married for 21 years. We dated for 2 prior to that. So I've been driving her around for 23 years now. I have never, ever, ever had an accident with her in the car. And I've never had an at-fault accident, period. I've had a couple little, like, in a parking lot back into somebody, but not like, I'm going down the road and hit somebody kind of thing. I've never done that.
You have an angel army.
Well, and the people that are wrecking behind me in my wake, and the whatever I leave in behind me, I don't take responsibility for it.
Let me just tell you, flying around to different countries with Jamison with very little sleep isn't recommended if he's driving everywhere and teaching everywhere. And it's
fun. Come on, you end up in Dothan on a back road, and
there's stuff I can't even say.
Yeah, for legal reasons, so as not to be liable for the damage done to that vehicle. So anyway, but I will say from time to time to Kelly, I'll say, can't you trust me? I've never wrecked with you in the car. I've never hurt you or the kids with and her answer is basically no, not while you drive like that. So whatever.
Insisting on doing a 3-point turn on the side of a mountain. And I'm like, you can back up more. And you're like, no, I got it. And we're like, the front of the van is like hanging off the front of the cliff, I'm like, gosh, I have 4 children at home. I think I'm not going to make it back. But we made it. Look, I'm here.
Yeah. So anyway.
Your dad doesn't even trust you. He gets out of the car when you do a 3-point turn on the side of a mountain.
It's true, he has. So my old father has got out of the car on me before. And I've induced like saintly ministers of the gospel to just swear in fear.
Kelly's in good company.
Yeah, okay, so this is certainly a digression, but for those of you listening, please understand that driving in the Middle East and in certain parts of like Greek islands where the roads are super narrow and Google tells you it's a road, but it's really a goat path, it just leads to certain kind of situations. And when you've dealt with them for your, a lot of years of your life,
you feel more comfortable than those of us that are just like popping in.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So it's definitely true.
But all of that was to say, even for me as a human, there's a part of me that's like, to my wife, to my kids, to people in my life about certain kinds of things. Part of me is like, can't you just trust me? Our relationship, it could be things that are less trivial maybe than driving, but wouldn't our relationship be better if you just trust me on this, And I think that God does that to us. And frankly, I think he puts us in situations that are scary because it is a test of our faith. He wants to see, can you trust me when you're scared to death?
And that's exactly what I do danger. When you're driving and there's real danger and I'm scared to death, I trust God.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandinthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.